screen here. Let's see. So I got a lot of tabs open. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to assign complex book entries. The first one is due next Tuesday. So making sure we know what this assignment is, what we're doing. If there is any questions about it, I can definitely answer them today. And then we're going to have a Blackboard prompt, just a very small in-class writing, nothing too crazy, just a little bit of in-class writing there. And then we're going to talk about Mla format. And so that's kind of what we're going to be doing today. So on Blackboard, I'm going to go on Blackboard here. And the assignment I'm going to be looking at is under the Assignments tab. It should be the only one available to you at the top. So anybody, if you don't have access to that, please let me know. So it's at the top here. It says Complex Book Entry Assignment Sheet. This is not where you will submit your assignment. This is just where you get the assignment information. You're going to submit your assignment under the Commonplace Book Entry tab. So that's going to be next Tuesday and Thursday for those. And so you can kind of see, again, I talked about this on Tuesday. We'll do something similar today. It won't be a complex book entry, but I'm going to have a similar Blackboard submission so you can understand what you would click on. But again, you would kind of click on this, hit Create Journal Entry, and then you would put your assignment in the text box there. If you don't necessarily want to keep Blackboard up for the whole time, if you want to write it on a Google document or Microsoft Word document and copy it and paste it over, that's great. I just do like for this to have it copied and pasted in the body, in the text box, just because it's easier for me to grade. I can look at it easier when I'm commenting on those. And so again, under the Assignments tab, I'm going to be going over this right here, this Complex Book Entry assignment sheet. So if you need to access that download it on your own computer so you have it. Normally in the classroom, I would hand out a physical copy of it, but we're not in the physical classroom, so I'm going to leave it up to everybody to get it themselves. Okay, so download it if you're a person who likes to print things off and have them hard copy, print it off yourself. Otherwise, you can get I have a flash drive. I know not everybody has one, but I like to keep a flash drive and have all of my documents. I have six classes this semester to 3 schools. So I have everything kind of organized by school, and then I have everything organized by section because I have different documents for each section. So if you download this, either the docx or the PDF, save it to your flash drive, then you have it. Say your internet's out one day, you don't have to wonder what is this assignment. You can just go to it, and that makes it a little bit easier. But anyway, the assignment here, I'm going to share the assignment sheet. I have it a little bit bigger, again, so everybody can kind of see it on their screens right now. I've changed this assignment a tiny bit since the previous semesters. But a complex book entry, which many of you may not have heard before, a complex book is not necessarily a collection of arguments, but rather a collection of ideas that a reader compiles from a text. And so the goal of them are to help research identify key passages that they can use in their own writing at a later date. So we're going to be doing research this semester, so a small part of it is mimicking that skill, mimicking the skill of research. So if you're researching and you're trying to find information, you're probably not going to be looking, if you find a 20-page article, you're not going to use all 20 pages of it in your essay. You might use a quote, maybe a few quotes, maybe a paragraph, but not much more than that. You might summarize it in a few sentences. You're not going to use the whole 20-page article. So just finding a quote or two, figuring out, well, which quote do I use? How do I know if it's relevant for me? And while the readings that we're going to be doing, these 4 are not necessarily going to be used in your papers down the road, I want to try to mimic that skill a little bit. So when you do start researching for your own papers, you have a little bit of that skill of gathering information, of annotating. A lot of times when somebody says annotating, they might highlight something in an article or an essay. They might write on the side if they have it in hard copy, or they're allowed to write on a book if it's theirs. And so a lot of times annotating. So this is a version of annotating. And so again, you're not necessarily reading them for the specific essays that you're going to be using in your essays down the road, but I do want to have that skill. And so there's 5 different steps to this. And the first step is to cite the source correctly using Mla format. The majority of today's class period will involve me going over what MLA format is. So today's class period should help you understand how you're supposed to cite that source. The purpose of me having you cite those sources is so you can practice, okay? We're not going to cite in the first paper, but we will for the second and third paper. And I do want everybody to have an idea of how to cite on their own, not just go to like a citation generator like EasyBib and put it in themselves. So I do want everybody to be able to understand how should I format this in MLA format. And if you do end up, copying a citation over from an EasyBib or a citation generator, sometimes they are wrong. A lot of times I see them in APA format. Sometimes I see them in the older MLA format. In 2016, the newer MLA format came about. So sometimes I see the older version. And I've been teaching and doing research and writing enough that I can tell the differences between them just basically in 5 seconds. And so, but I want you all not necessarily have to do that in that short of a time. But I do want you to be able to stand, okay, so this date, APA format, the date's going to go in the beginning, and MLA format, it's towards the end of the citation. So if you do see something that's off, you can kind of go about and say, why is this wrong? And then go ahead and fix it yourself. So I do want you to be able to understand how a citation is correct, and also in text citation as well. So you're going to cite the source in MLA format just as you would in the works cited page. And then you're going to include one quote that catches your eye and seems interesting to you. And this would be anything that stands out. Please, if you don't make it the first sentence necessarily, but if the first sentence does catch your eye, you can do that. But do read it. Sometimes this might mean reading the whole essay or the whole article and then coming back and finding a quote. This might mean finding different quotes as you go along. There are different strategies to finding it, but whatever pops out, this seems really interesting to me. And then you're going to write about a paragraph or more, at least a paragraph, engaging in that quote. So I really don't have any specific rule to what you could write about. I just want you to engage, to think a little bit more critically. This could be what this quote reminds you of. If it reminds you of a TV show you're watching now, or a song that you know, or an experience you had. The first entry on Tuesday is going to be about writing. It's out of the textbook, and so you might think, okay, I remember a previous English class, we did something similar or something completely different, and so you might talk about that experience. I want you guys to just engage in that quote, similar to if you found a quote in an article you were using for research. You wouldn't necessarily write a paragraph about it, but I do want you to kind of mimic that experience. What does it remind you of? Why are you picking that quote specifically? Why is it significant to you? Okay, and then after that, you're going to answer 2 questions, and these are new to this assignment. I used to have three quotes in 3 paragraphs, and I didn't have this, but I was thinking about how I can make this assignment more purposeful and meaningful to everybody, and help you throughout the semester even more. And so these 2 are answer the question, who is the target audience of essay, and write about a 1 paragraph explanation of your answer. And then answer the question, what is the purpose of your essay, and a 1 paragraph explanation of your answer. And by target audience, I mean, I have this down here a little bit too. I have a little small definition of what I'm talking about. Audience, I mean a general group of people who the author more than likely intended to read their piece of writing. So this goes back to the idea called rhetoric, and some of you may have written a paper, a rhetorical analysis paper in a previous class, maybe in high school. If you've heard of the words ethos, pathos, logos, that might kind of spark a bell. If you have done that before, rhetorical analysis. But on the surface, rhetoric just means the art of persuasion. And so how a piece of work is persuading somebody to think or feel something. And so a lot of times that has to do with like marketing or an advertisement. They're persuading you to buy a car or buy this laundry detergent. And those are a little bit easier to think about what the audience is. But out of your textbook, you might think, who is the audience for this? Is it going to be scholars of writing, or is it going to be people who are learning how to write? And so each not all of the essays you're going to be reading are out of the textbook. Some of them are completely different. But the second paper we're going to be writing this semester is a rhetorical analysis paper. The first paper you write this semester, well, it's a narrative. You'll need to have an audience in mind for your own writing. And so being able to identify an audience in a piece is really important throughout this entire semester. So I want to kind of practice this on a smaller level with this assignment. And in addition, you also want to talk about the purpose of the piece. So that means, why does the piece of writing matter to the audience, or what is the main point? So you want to identify the audience and the purpose. So to kind of recap, you'll cite the source correctly using Mla format, include one quote that catches your eye and seems interesting, write at least a paragraph expanding or responding to that quote in some way, and then answer the question, who is the target audience and what is the purpose? And so I'm going to pause right now because I know that's a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions about that at the moment? I'm going to come back to that. If anybody has any questions about that, you can even, unmute yourself or put it in the chat in some way. Yes, Connor. So you can type it in Word and then copy and paste it into the white text box area, as long as I can read it. Yeah, that's fine. You can definitely do that. Any other questions? That's a good question. What does it mean to cite the quote? That's a great question. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I have a whole PowerPoint. I'm going to talk about that. Mla format, it's just you're going to cite anything. Some classes might require you APA format. I'm not going to be, so late, I know you joined in late. I'm not going to have the ability. I only have an hour left of class to go back. I am recording this, so eventually I would put it up on Blackboard. I am talking about commonplace book entries. You can look at the assignment sheet on Blackboard. But I'm not going to have the ability to necessarily go back. So go ahead and look at the assignment sheet on Blackboard, the commonplace book entry. But anything that you write, and if it has any type of information from another person, you need to be able to cite that information so you do not plagiarize. So a lot of English classes will have Mla format. If you're taking a psychology class or something science-based, you will probably have an APA format. And so there are different types of citations. There's Chicago style. There's so many different ones. But in humanities, meaning English, arts, history, maybe we're going to be using Mla format. And it's just a way to be able to show where you found other people's information. And so if you provide a quote from somebody, you always need to be able to show where you found that. And there are specific criteria and rules. This is one of the only things I will say all semester is there is 100% right and wrong answer to. Okay, there is specifically formatted. I don't know all the reasoning behind them. I didn't create it. I just follow it, and I did change it every 4 or 5 years. But I don't know why. But that happens a lot. But these are good questions. So I'm going to have a whole PowerPoint and kind of talk about that. And it's just a minute. I am running out of time though. Does anybody have any other quick questions just about that assignment sheet, what I went over? Okay, I don't see any right now.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I have it right. So you said to find a quote, then write a paragraph about it, and then find the target audience and the purpose, and then cite and quote it?
Yes, yeah. So that would be, it would be 3. It would be, technically you would have like 1, 2, and 3. So you have the quote in the paragraph, audience in paragraph, and then purpose in paragraph. So you can kind of format it like that. So quote, paragraph, and then your answer to the audience, paragraph, explaining your answer, and then the answer to the purpose, and then the paragraph explaining that answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Question, yeah. So just to kind of really quickly kind of talk about audience and purpose for a minute, I have this image. This is something I've used before when I teach rhetorical analysis on either other classes. Just real quick, Who do you all think the audience of this image might be? Yeah, so Connor says drivers regardless of any age. Yeah, so it could be a driver. Are there any other audiences that they might be thinking about? Jesse, I'm going to come back to your question when I return. So it's just this image. My question was, who do you think the audience of it might be? And so Connor said in the chat, drivers regardless of any age, which is correct. Yeah, it could be any drivers. Yeah, parents, exactly. Got Brooke and Kenzie saying parents. Yeah, those are the two most easier ones. Parents with kids being distracted while driving. Yes, they are trying to persuade drivers of any age and also parents. What is the purpose of that? What are they trying to persuade their audience of? Yeah, pay attention to their kids, to pay more attention to things around them. So if you're doing this for, I know this isn't an essay, but I don't have time to do it for a full essay in this short of time. But if you were doing your complex book entry and you were trying to answer the audience, you would say the audience, intended audience are parents or drivers or both. Could be a lot of times for any piece of work, there could be more than one audience. And then you would explain that. I think that the audiences are parents or drivers because, and you would explain that in a little bit of paragraph. And then for the purpose, they are trying to persuade the parents or drivers that they should not be distracted and pay more attention to their kids. And I think this because, okay. And so then you would write, yeah, and to not get distracted so easily. And exactly. And so this is a little bit easier when you have a little bit easier image. It's a lot easier to think about in terms of marketing, advertising. If you still have Hulu that has ads like I do, you see this all the time. I grew up, watching cable TV or like Channel 2, and there'd be commercials all the time. So if you have a lot of streaming services like Netflix or Amazon Prime, you probably don't see as many ads now, but you still have them all around you when you're looking at the internet. If you're on social media, they're still advertising to you. I think it was like on Facebook formulas, for every 3 posts you see, there's an ad. So even though we might not see commercials all the time as much as we used to, we're still going to be seeing ads. And so this is happening all the time. There's always an intended audience for these images, and there's always going to be a purpose. It might not be that complicated, but we can easily see, yes, they're trying to persuade this audience to think about this. And so everything has, every text has some type of audience, even if the author isn't necessarily as aware of it as maybe they could be. Everything has one. So those are the 2 answers for that question. So you'll cite the source, Mla format, quote that you find, paragraph about that quote, audience, paragraph about the audience, purpose, paragraph about the audience, about the purpose. That will kind of be the format of it. Does anybody have any questions about the format of that? And what type? So Lexi said, what type of quote are we trying to find? It's any quote that's interesting to you. And so it does. There's no rule for what quote it is. It just has to come from the essay that's assigned. Okay. So you read an essay, and you might highlight the quote that you find as you're reading it. You might read the whole chapter or whole essay, and then you go back and you find that quote. It's something that sparks you. So because when you're researching, you're gonna how exactly are you gonna be able to find a quote from to support your argument later on in the semester? How do you know which quote you're going to be using? You don't at the beginning. So this is trying to practice those skills. Trying to practice those skills of being able to see which quote exactly am I supposed to use? So I don't care which quote it is. It's just a quote that seems interesting to you, that stands out to you in some way. And then the paragraph is responding to it, just engaging in it more. Why did you pick this quote? What does it remind you of? Does it remind you of another experience or another TV show or something? I don't really care what quote you use, and I don't really care what you write about. I just care that you're engaging with the quote, that you're thinking a little bit more critically, except for this quote is talking about. So don't simply summarize what it is talking about, engage with a little bit more. And so also practicing those critical thinking skills just a little bit more about the reading that we are reading, because reading and writing, they go together quite a bit. What we read and we write, a lot of people think them as separate, but they go together quite a bit. So this assignment is also trying to connect the dots of that. Does that make sense, Lexi? Hopefully that may help you answer that question. And then contrast, does it need to be double spaced? And here we use bullet points to help explain each main topic. And so, yes, so you can you don't have to double space it. You can. I don't necessarily care if it's single spaced or double spaced, as long as it's about a paragraph. Okay, just don't put like one sentence. That's not going to be. And each of these is worth 25 points. And Lexi asked, what is the essay we are getting these from? That's an excellent question. So each day, and I'm going to bring up the syllabus that I went over on Tuesday. Each day you're going to have a reading assigned. It's not going to be every single day, but every day there is assigned. There will be something due, and you'll know when it is due because on the schedule, and this is the same schedule at the bottom of the syllabus I showed you all on Tuesday, you'll see due. Anything that's due or assigned that day, you'll see that word due. Complex book entry number 1 by 7:59, and that's right before class starts on Tuesday for BG chapter 4, Recalling an Experience. So BG, a Previously Bedford Guide to College Writing, that's a textbook. If you don't get the textbook by Tuesday, please send me an email and I can try to send you a scan, but everybody should try to be getting that textbook for this class soon. And so every essay is going to be different. You might see this is for American Dream. So if it's not in the textbook, it's going to be on Blackboard. So you'll know what to do. So this is going to be over that chapter, and I have the page numbers here for you as well. And so if you are going on Blackboard, you'll be able to go under the Assigned Readings tab. And so, for example, you can see this is the reading for Thursdays, for next Thursday. You download it, you read it, you do the assignment. You can also know what essay is assigned for which day, because I will also have it under the assignment. And so this is under the Complex Book Entries tab. And so I have exactly what I have on the assignment sheet here, but I also have everything else here. What day it's due, what time it's due, what the reading is. So those are 2 places that you can find this information on. 1, the syllabus, the schedule at the bottom of the syllabus, and 2, the Complex Books Entries tab. Okay, does anybody else have any questions about this? I don't think I'm actually going to have time to do the Blackboard thing. I'm going to try to maybe at the end of class. This took way longer than I thought it would. I feel like that's going to be this semester. Everything's taking way longer than I thought it would. Okay, and then I'm going to go back up to Jesse's question. I'm sorry I skipped you. So the very first entry we're writing about, so I don't know, Jesse, I don't know where you found Koreatown. Where did you, I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
So can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I turned my mic on and I wasn't sure. So whenever I looked in my book, I don't know if I have the same book as everybody, because I'm starting to look at the pages and I'm thinking, the pages that I have and you have might be different, but I have the Koreatown story, and then I have another story on those pages that says The Hunter, and it's a student essay. Is that not right?
Okay, hold on 1 second. So I actually might have made a mistake on the page number. So let me look at something real quick, because the problem is that Bedford Guide put out a new edition this year. I don't think it's necessary to put out a new edition. So I'm just looking at my old book here and making sure I didn't forget to update those page numbers.
Okay.
Let me look, because I might have done that. Okay, I think I did. Does it say chapter 4 in your textbook?
It does.
Okay.
But my chapter 4, I mean, it starts on like, I think it's 50 instead of 48, but I mean, regardless, you know, it's only a couple pages off. But
yeah, the chapter should be
like the actual story that mine starts is on 50.
okay.
But it says returning to my father's Koreatown.
Is that the beginning of the chapter?
No. The beginning of the chapter says recalling and observing, and that's on page 48.
Okay, yeah, so that's correct. So
Okay.
there are some student essays within that chapter. You don't have to necessarily cite the student essays individually. You would just be citing the chapter itself.
Okay.
And I haven't talked about that yet, but I will when I talk about Mla format here in a second. So you would be the chapter title, you know, would be the chapter you're referring to, and then the information within that chapter is everything that you could derive your quote from. So anything in those pages would be fair game for that chapter.
Okay, so we're citing the whole chapter.
Yeah, so you're citing the whole chapter. So, for example, if you were like using this chapter to as a source in a research paper, how would you cite that? And you're not necessarily citing the textbook for that, but you could have been, right? So that's if you were citing it in a works cited page. I'm going to talk about what a works cited page is too here in a minute. So if these words do not sound familiar to any of you, I'm going to be defining them just in a minute. These are kind of words I use interchangeably throughout the semester. Does anybody else have any questions about any of this? Let me go back to the chat. No, I don't see anything. These are really great questions.
So my chapter 4 says recalling and observing. Right?
Okay. So yeah, it should be recalling and observing. I think I accidentally, the old edition used to be called recalling an experience. So I think that's what the syllabus says. It's the same thing. I just accidentally forgot to change the title over. I've been using the same textbook for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. But it's the same thing. I will update that. But recalling and observing would be what you would want to, that'd be the chapter. Yes. Any other questions about this? These are great questions. Okay, so if you have any more questions, I love these. Don't feel like I'm ignoring you. Just go ahead and put them in the chat. What I am going to be doing, I don't think I'm actually going to have time to do the Blackboard. I intended for this to be like 10 or 15 minutes, and it's taken double that. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Mla format. If I have the ability to come back to that at the end of class, I will. But I do want to have enough time to talk about this. So I'm going to share my screen again here if I can. And what I'm going to be looking at now is also on Blackboard. So if you go on Blackboard, I have my screen shared here. Under the in-class readings tab, you'll find one thing, and this is what we're going to be going over today. It's a PowerPoint about citing. And so you can return to this if you have a question. If you already have the textbook, there's sections in the back of the textbook that talk about citing too that can help you as well. And the third resource that you can use is a website called Purdue OWL. It's Purdue University's online writing lab. So it's OWL like the bird, OWL. And they do a really great job of updating information. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as I go through this. But right now, I'm going to be going through this PowerPoint. I don't always use PowerPoints. It's just helpful when I'm talking about something like this. So I have it in the Microsoft's version, the PowerPoint, and also as a PDF. So I'm going to be going through this myself, but if you, of course, want to look at it yourself right now or come back to it later, this is where it will be. And so I'm going to bring that up on my screen right now. And I'm going to talk about some of these basic terms here. And so MLA stands for Modern Language Association. I talked about this just a few minutes ago. It's used in the humanities to be able to show who outside sources and how those sources are being used in your paper. And I'll talk about some of the basic rules today, so you have a general idea of how to cite a source for your assignment on Tuesday. Other formats includes APA and Chicago. I apologize for anybody who is taking a class that requires APA. They are kind of like two different languages in terms of citing. Like if you're taking psychology or nursing, you more than likely will be citing an APA and Mla in this class at the same time. I can help you if you need any help with that. Just let me know and I can definitely help. All papers that you write in the future should be in Times New Roman 12-point font. The entries I talked about this morning don't necessarily have to be double spaced, but the formal essays should be. Okay, so if I'm talking right now, I'm talking about a formal paper that you would write for this class and turn in. Times New Roman 12-point font, double spaced, frontage margins, indenting paragraphs, page header on each page. So in the upper right-hand corner, you would have your last name and the page number as a running total, as a running header. If anybody needs help in knowing how to do that, I can help you. I can upload, there's small, very short, like a minute or two YouTube videos on how to do that in Google Docs, and I can do that if anybody has a question. And then another part to remember is that if you're citing a book or an article, a big question when you're trying to figure out how to cite it is to ask yourself, what kind of source are you looking at? And by source, I mean the actual text. And so if you had a textbook, that's a book. If you are looking at a chapter out of an article, that would be an essay or an article. And so knowing what you're looking at. A lot of different sources are cited differently. Not everything is going to be the same. Your citation for Tuesday might look a tiny bit different than the one for Thursday. Okay, it's going to maybe look a little bit different versus the following Tuesday. It depends what you're citing. So when you're doing your research for your papers and you're looking online and you see website, you're not going to be citing the same way you would as a chapter of a textbook. It's just not going to be the same. But I'm going to talk about a little bit some of those differences here. And so if you do have a book, so for example, the Bedford Guide to College Writers, that's a book. That's going to be in italics. If you have an article, so Recalling an Experience, or that was the formal title of this chapter, that's going to be in quotation marks. No title will ever be underlined. That is an old version, so if you see anything underlined, you know that's outdated. And no title will ever be both in quotation marks and italics. So it will always be one or the other. So you know if you're looking at a book. So ask yourself, what type of source is this? Is this a book or a journal? It's in italics. You also will see some things in italics if it's a publisher. So if you're looking at a website and you're citing something from the New York Times, publishers will also be in italics. But for this case, for the citations coming up next week, you won't have anything like that to italicize. So it'll be Bedford book, italics, article or chapter, or a smaller work within a larger work, like a chapter, that's going to be in quotation marks. And like I said, nothing is underlined. I've been throwing around these terms a little bit without defining them, so I'm going to do this now. Works cited page. You're going to be citing your source, your chapter, textbook, or another essay, as it would be on a works cited page. A works cited page is at the bottom of your essay. And what I'm going to do right now, actually, is I'm going to go to Purdue OWL and kind of show you a visual, because some of you might not really know what I'm talking about. Right now I'm on Purdue OWL, that website I talked about earlier. And I'm going to show you an example works cited page, because I think that's going to be helpful for you to look at. So this is a works cited page, and it's literally a list of sources that you have cited in your essay. Okay. You should never have any sources in your works cited page that do not show up in your essay. I know sometimes when people do research papers, they find extra sources and end up taking them out. Okay, find everything that's in here. You should have them in alphabetical order. And so if this was a person's essay, they would have the formal essay. So somewhere on the paper, this student is looking at Cornelia Dean's Executive on a Mission Saving the Planet from the New York Times in 2007. You're not going to have all of this information in the body of the essay, and that's because it would be too bulky. If I had a sentence and then right next to that sentence I had all of this information, that would look really clunky to the reader. it would be too much, it would be unnecessary, and we don't want to have all of this information, but we do want to have it known. So we always have the works cited page at the very, very bottom of the essay. So it's there, it's just not hindering the flow of the paper. Okay, so if you're doing a works cited page or in-text citation, it's a little bit different. So this is a sample paper I'm pulling up. That's from Purdue L again. And you can look at these things on your own. Again, Purdue L, I think I have a link to it somewhere. So let's see. I'm trying to find an example of an in-text citation. If I can find one. My goodness. Okay, so here's one. So this person has Dan Hoff and 7. So typically in in-text citation, you're going to have the last name of the author used. If there's 2 or 3 authors, you would have that. And I'll talk about this in a minute on the PowerPoint as well. And the page number you found that on. So for your commonplace book entry, you know, if you're talking about the textbook, you would have the author or authors in there. And if you found it on page 52, you would write 52. If you're citing a website that doesn't have that page number, you don't have it. I always say page number if applicable, right? So if there's not a page number, you don't include one, but if there is, you put it in there. So this allows, as somebody is reading your essay, they can really easily see where it is. So the last name of the author and the page number. And so they're not going to see all this unnecessary information, the date it came out. Those things are all important, but you're not going to want to just copy and paste all that information in your source. This is just going to be really neat and easy, and it's going to allow your reader to flow. So in-text is in the body of the essay, while works cited is at the bottom. And that's the main difference between them. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and continue here. And so, again, works cited citations at the end of the work, and text citations in the body of the work. Everybody, when you're writing an essay, you should have both. Okay, you should have both of these. I should be able to look and see, okay, you're looking at Smith. I should be able to go down to your works cited page and see all of the information needed, but it shouldn't be in the body, okay? Again, this is to give credit for the people whose information you are using in your paper. So you're not plagiarizing, you're not stealing, you're giving credit to their work. And if you are using your own ideas, of course, you would cite those. Okay. And this is an example I have. Actually, I think it came from Purdue Health too. Some point in time, in text citation, human beings have been described as symbol using animals. And then I have Burke and 3. If you have a quotation, you're going to have that quotation mark at the end, the parentheses, and the period on the opposite side of that quotation mark. And this is the works cited page example. You would have the last name. It always goes last name, comma, first name. Always present their name as they show up. So if they add a middle name or a middle initial, include that. Don't shorten their name. If they use Timothy, say Timothy. If they use Tim, say Tim. Just as I asked you guys on Tuesday what your preferred name was, you're going to be using the preferred way that these authors are wanting their names to look to. So if they Crab, comma, Tim, if they said Tim Anthony, you'd write Tim Anthony. Whatever shows up, you write. And then, as I said earlier, if you see something in quotation marks, that's going to be an article or a chapter or a smaller work. So this here in quotation marks about sports, that's going to be the chapter that this person is citing or the article. And then you have this here would be the publisher, and then this would be something you might find on EBSCOhost or something. And EBSCOhost is on Jeffco's website. You can find different articles that aren't necessarily on Google. It's a database full of information. This isn't how you're going to be citing the essay on Tuesday, but it is an example. And so if you found this would be an example of a works cited citation. This is an example of an in-text citation. And then I just literally looked at this. If you want to go back to what I looked at, that works cited example, you can use this link. Download the PDF or the PowerPoint yourself, and you can copy and paste this and look at that yourself. These are some more examples of in-text citations. The easier way to think about it is just have a full quote, and then you put that information at the end. But however, not all in-text citations are the same. This person has an introduction to a quote and just a little bit of that quote here. And you notice that they don't have the last name of the author at the end. The reason for this is if you add the last name or the name of the author at the beginning of the sentence or somewhere within that sentence, you don't have to put their last name in that citation, in that parentheses. You would only have to put the page number. If they didn't have their last name, like down here at the very bottom, I guess they don't have that. And the second one, they don't have the last name of the author anywhere in the sentence, so they have to put that last name in there. So include the last name of the author in the parentheses if you don't include their name in the sentence you were citing. If you do, you only have to put the page number if you have it. In addition, you don't only want to cite things that are direct quotes. You also want to cite any idea or paraphrase, summary, anything that the idea or summary is coming from another person. So while this third citation doesn't have any quotes, you still want to put it in that citation because it's an example of a summary. So they are summarizing the ideas of Wordsworth, and they have to be able to have cited. So again, if any idea or quote or anything that comes from another person, you always need to be able to say this person said it or it's this person's idea. And you have to be able to show where it came from. And so Wordsworth at the beginning, page number at the end. And this is the same citation I had earlier. This is a component of something you might find on Jeffco's library database. And I have here, so because this might not make sense to a lot of you. So you can see this is the last name of the author. This is the first name of the author. This is the title of the article, title of the journal, volume number, issue number, date, and page range, and then database and URL. If you find something online, this isn't going to apply to your textbook, but if you find anything online, Jeffco's library database, on Google, something, you're always going to add the URL at the end, but you shouldn't have that problem with any of the citations for the complex book entries. Different works citations, all of them should be have a hanging indent, and what this means is that you're going to have the first line not indented, but you should indent every line after this. So I like to think about this as the opposite of a regular paragraph. If you're writing a paragraph on Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you would have the first line indented, but everything else not. And so if you think about a paragraph, this is the opposite of that. So you have the first line not, and every single line indented after that. And again, later on in the semester, when we're doing this more, I can put very short YouTube videos up to show how to do that on Google Docs and Microsoft Word. Usually you should just hit the tab button. Every now and then, some people's computers don't want to tab, or they tab the whole citation over, and it's annoying. So let me know if anybody needs me to put that up later on when we're writing or citing, and I can definitely do that. And so what I've been talking about so far is basic citations, what you might find with one author, one article, and one book. But not all citations look the same. As I said at the very beginning of this presentation, you want to make sure that you are at first asking what type of source is it? Is it a book? Is it an article? We're looking at a newspaper website. Is it a blog? What exactly am I looking at? And so what I'm going to talk about now is some examples of more complicated ones. Sometimes when you find a source, there's not an author known. Sometimes this means it's not a credible source and you should not use it in your paper. However, sometimes you might have a large organization work together. There's hundreds of people working on a single document, a single source, and they can't list 100 or more people on that. That just would be ridiculous. So what they do is they credit it to the organization. I see this a lot of times. If it's a government organization or it's just a larger organization, you have so many people working on a document, you might not have one or two individual authors. So sometimes it is possible for a source not to have an author and it's still credible. If this is the case, the next thing you will do, so if this had like John Smith at the beginning, you're going to start that source with the next thing. So that source would start with the article title, so the estate tax debate. That means that if you don't have an author, your in-text citation will always show the very first thing that comes up on that citation. So if there's no author, your in-text citation will show the article's title. So you have in parentheses in quotation marks, the estate tax debate. This is a big reason why I always suggest doing the works cited page first or the citation first, so you know exactly what's going to go in that in-text citation. If there's no author, you don't put that author. If there is an author, you put that author. It just kind of depends on what's there. And these are two examples. You have, this is a article or essay chapter, political margins and quotation marks, exactly what I just talked about. And if you have a book title you're doing a larger book, this would be in italics. So I always know if it should be a book or article, because if it's in italics or quotation marks. And if you have multiple authors, sometimes there's not just one. People collaborate on different works. If you have 2 or 3 authors, you would have the first name is also always last name, comma, first name. If you have a second or third author, you would put them just as you normally would, first name, last name. And again, if they have that middle initial and middle name, you put that in there. Okay. If you have 3 authors, you would just have and so-and-so, whatever their name is. Okay. But there's always that word and between the last one and the one that came before. If you have more than 3 authors, if there's 4 or 5, 6 people, I've seen articles that have 10 people, they really are collaborating on this source. You're going to have what's called an et al. So if you have 3 or more, or over 3 sources, so 4 or more, you're going to write the last name of the first person, the first name listed, and you're going to write et al. At the end. So this is an example of an in-text citation that has 3 authors, so Smith, Yang, and Moore, not page 76. This is an example of something that had more than 3 authors. And when I was teaching, I taught some very short summer classes. One was 6 weeks and one was 8 weeks, and way too short a time, I think 6 weeks was, to take that. Excuse me, just drinking some water. A lot of people kind of forgot that. It was really easy to forget. I will remind everybody, you can come back. I am recording this. You can come back and rewatch this. I will keep this PowerPoint on Blackboard, so make sure you come back if you forget something. This isn't a quiz. I'm not making you memorize any of this. I don't memorize anything on Mla Format. I've just been doing it for well over a decade, and so I know it really well. It's just because I've been using it a long time. So I can very easily identify what's wrong with a source. Sometimes I have to look it up if I forget, but most of the time I can look at it and see, okay, this is what's wrong, because I just have been using it for so many years. But I'm not quizzing anybody on any of this. I just want you to know the basics, okay? But if you have 4 more sources, you would use that et al. That's just indicating there's over 4 more sources. If you have 2 books that illustrate the same idea, so if you are writing a paper and you don't want to have 2 different citations, you would use the semicolon. And so this is showing that both of these sources, both Edwards and Smith, are showing the same idea. Many experts believe that students should not be taught research MLA, to research MLA, not memorize it. And so these 2 authors are showing the same. I wouldn't suggest going out and finding 5 different sources that illustrate the same idea. But if you really need to show more than one source says this, you can do that by using the semicolon here. If you have multiple authors, so I already talked about this et al. So I showed that a little bit here. This is just explaining it. Yeah, don't have 10 different names on your citation. That's too many. Let's see. This is really important because the slide I have on right now, work in an anthology, reference, or collection, this is going to be how you're going to be citing the majority of the readings that you're going to be doing for these complete book entries. So if you're like, how do I cite this? This is the format of how you would cite that source. So what this means, an anthology, reference, or collection, is most of the time there's going to be 2 different types of sources they're going to be using. They're both really similar. The first one is like your textbook. Your textbook is written, I think, by 3 different people. I don't have a physical copy of this edition of the textbook. I just have a digital copy. So I think there's 3 different authors. Those are the 3 people who wrote the entire textbook, okay? So they wrote every single chapter. The only thing they might not have written is the student examples or the essays, the readings within, okay? So if you have a reading within there, you're going to, like, by somebody named John Smith, you would cite that. like a professional essay. Student essays, not necessarily, it's just because they're not, like, they weren't published or something, but the readings within, if you're just only looking at that, you're going to be wanting to cite that. However, if you're citing just a quote from chapter 4, that was written by all 3 people. So it's a smaller part of, so a smaller chapter or smaller work within a bigger work. So you have, again, like I said, it's a chapter within the book. So again, last name, first name, title of essay. So this would be the title of the chapter. I forgot what the new version of this chapter is called, but like recalling experience or whatever that the new version of that is. I already forgot. But so you'd have recalling experience, title of collection or book. That's going to be your Bedford Guide, okay, or the full title of that. The Bedford Guide for student writing. That's not it. It's something similar to that. I have edited by. You will only use edited by if the name of the person writing the chapter or the article is different than the person's name you see at the beginning, okay? And so for the chapter, you're not going to have an editor because the people writing the book are the same people who wrote the chapter. You will have an editor if the person whose name is at the beginning, they are not necessarily writing everything in it. And I'm going to show you examples because I know this might be a little bit confusing. I'm going to go on Blackboard again, and I'm going to go under in-class readings, and I'm trying to find which one of these, not in-class readings, assigned readings. Let me look at one of these. So actually, I think this might be the only one. Okay, so this is American Dreams. It's not loading. Oh, this is fun. Technological issues. Good morning, everybody. This is really great. Let me look on my flash drive because I do want to show everybody an example of what I mean. And if that file is not loading, I think that's excellent time for actually me to see that, just because I need to fix that link. Hopefully there's not a problem with it, but I can fix that if needed. So my apologies. Stuff like this happens sometimes, especially apparently when we're learning online. Good times. Bear with me. This is a full site. Okay, so this is the full. Let me make it a little bit smaller. Should be the full file. So you'll see down here, American Dreams is the title of the essay. This is the reading you're going to be doing for next Thursday. So American Dreams is the title of the essay. Kevin Jennings is the author. So he wrote this. If you ever see an author next to the essay, right by it, that's the person who wrote it. So Kevin Jennings wrote American Dreams, and then you have the essay down below. Up here, you're going to see the title. This is the title of the book, okay, that it came from. This would be in italics. And you're going to see down here, Bennett L. Singer. He's the editor. And a lot of times, if you see an editor, you'd probably see it like down here at the bottom sometimes. But Bennett Singer, he would be the editor. So Bennett Singer didn't write American Dreams. He is somebody who collaborated with other people. He reached out to Kevin Jennings. He found the people to edit, and then he edited it. And he kind of made sure it was ready to go for publication. It was ready to go for this book. He worked with all the authors that were writing it. So Bennett Singer didn't write the words, but he did work to make sure it was ready for publication. He did choose the author. He did choose the essay. He approved it. So he did a lot of work of bringing all of the works together for that one book. But in terms of the words on the page, Kevin Jennings wrote them. And so if I come back to this here, this PowerPoint, just kind of show you what I'm talking about. If I can, I always am really bad about doing all of these things. I apologize. Okay. So if I talk about edited, you're only going to have an editor if you have a different name. So Bennett Singer is different from Kevin Jennings. But for the textbook, you're not going to have an editor. Okay. But you would have the names of the author or authors, the title of the chapter, an essay in quotation marks, the title of the book or publisher in italics. And then you're always going to have a publisher. So that would be the company that put it out into the world. So if you're looking at a news article, that would be New York Times or CNN or whatever you might be looking at. I think this would be Bedford St. Martin. So it's the Bedford Guide, the year that it came out, and then page range of entry. Sometimes if you're also looking at the chapter textbook, you're also going to have a different edition. So you have this is where it comes confusing. Citations can be very confusing. If you have an edition of a book that's like, I think the textbook's on the 12th edition. When I started here 4 years ago, they were on their 10th. So they just keep coming out with different versions of the textbook. You would have that after the book title. So you would have like 12th edition after that. And so this is all general idea of the format of how you would cite this. So I have 2 examples down here. So this is an example of how you might cite the essay for next Thursday. So you have last name, first name, article title, book title, edited by, publisher, year, and page range. And you're always going to have the page range. So you can look at that. I try to have the page numbers up there. So if you're like 24th or 34, that is the pages that you're looking at. If you were citing the entire book and not just the chapter or the article within, you wouldn't need the page numbers. You only need them if you're doing like a specific chapter or article within that big book. And then, but for the textbook, you'll need this. You won't need the editor, but you'll replace it with an edition. So it'd be 12th edition. Citing a website. These are a little bit different if you do cite a website. You have the same thing, author, article title, publisher. So if you're looking at Purdue University, you're always going to have the date and you're always going to have a URL. So just the website, the URL that you got it from. And it's a generally good idea. This is a little bit conflicting information. If you're looking at a website like Purdue Owl or New York Times, it's generally a good idea to put what date you accessed it. This would just be like literally if I was saying today, I would say August 20th, 2020. And so that the reason for that is because sometimes the website might change its information. It might disappear. So you're saying as of this date that I'm looking at it, the information is how I'm presenting it to you. So if they edit it later on or they completely eliminate their website, that's kind of showing that a little bit. Addressing an author. I saw a funny meme on Facebook the other day, maybe a few weeks ago, talking about this. Generally, it's a good idea to, again, as I said earlier, present the author's name as it is listed for professional purposes. If you're writing their name in the essay, you want to refer to them by your last name. So you might say, John Smith, and then refer to them as Smith later on, unless there's more than one Smith that you're using. In that case, use first and last name. This is because, and a lot of English teachers have said this, I said it before, the authors that you're looking at aren't your friends. They're professional authors. I saw this funny thing online last week that said some student, I think it was a high school student, was quoting Neil Gaiman. And Neil Gaiman is a really famous author. He wrote like the Sandman graphic novels, American Gods. He's done a lot of really cool things, but he's a really famous author, Neil Gaiman, and he was writing like a book report for a book that he wrote, and he tweeted him online and asked, my teacher says I can't refer to you by Neil in my book report because we're not friends. Can I have your permission to call you Neil and say that we're friends? And he responded and he said yes, and so he showed it to his English teacher, and so he was able to call him Neil instead of Gaiman in his book report, which I just found hilarious. That's never something I've seen before, but generally you do want to put the last name of the author as you're talking about referring them. Don't just call them by their first name, unless maybe you actually do know them. And so, again, this is the Purdue Owl website, so if you do want to copy and paste this, look at it a little bit more, you can definitely do that. I'm going to kind of skim through these a little bit. You may have seen this before in the past. If you don't have a page number available, you can just put NP. If there's no date, you can put ND. If there's no publisher, don't use it. You should always, always, always have a publisher. It's not going to be a credible source. So there should never be an instance where you don't have a publisher. Again, that's the people who are putting it out, like Bedford St. Martin's or New York Times. Never do that. I said this earlier in the class period, be aware of cutting and pasting. If you do that, it's possible it might be wrong. So if you find it on a citation generator, It could be an MLA format from a previous edition, or maybe an APA or Chicago style. Always going to make sure that you're doing it yourself, that you're actually learning how to do that. The point of these complex book entries, the citations, are so you have a place where you can practice them, practice how to cite, so when you get to your major essays, you have a better idea of it. The full entry is worth 25 points. Generally, if there's no citation whatsoever, that's going to be 5 points. And so I actually had somebody over the summer who she had, like, I think for that class, they had 8 complex book entries. It was a 6-week class. So they had 8 complex book entries, and she didn't cite the source for any of them. So there was 5 points taken out of every single one of her citation or complex book entries. At the end of the semester, she had like a 78%. She needed literally 20 points to get a B. And had she been citing throughout the semester and gotten those 5 points, she would have had a B. Like, literally, not even like doing anything to her papers. It would have been just citing her sources. So those 5 points can add up. Okay, so that's actually happened just a month ago. Somebody didn't get the grade they said they needed because they didn't cite the source. Okay, so if you are missing something, if you have the citation and it's completely botched, it's not going to be completely the end. You won't fail the assignment, I promise you. I just want you to try. I want you to practice. For everybody's entry, I will comment and give advice. Say, this is what it should be happening. This actually should be what it looks like, and I will tell you why. I will expect you then to take my commentary, use it, and apply it to the next assignment, and then learn. I just want you to learn how to cite. Again, we're not memorizing or anything like that. A few other things for essays. If you have a shorter quotation, this is what you might commonly see: fewer than 4 lines. You're going to have like that quote and just in a single line. If you have a block quote or more than four lines, it's going to look a little bit different. And this I actually put up as a website and kind of intentionally. Actually, no. Where did it go? I caught it down in preparation to look at a works cited page. This is going to be what a longer quote would look like. You don't actually have that in quotation marks, but you still have the in-text citation at the end. If you have a quote that's more than 4 lines, you would have just, again, the beginning of, you would just tab it over. So the whole thing, this is the whole quote, you would just tab it over. And this just makes it easier to read. I don't suggest having too many of these. If you have too many long quotes, that means you don't have as much writing of your own. But however, if you just have one, in a 5-page paper, don't have 1 per page or 1 per paragraph. That's too many. But a block quote literally just means you have a quote that's long. It's more than 4 lines. And that's all that is. And then let me go back here. I have a few more. If you're omitting words from a quote, so if you just want to write the first and the end of that sentence, you would have ellipsis, which is just 3 dots. So many things, including the Mla format. So sometimes you don't want to, maybe they have a list of 10 things and you don't want to list all 10 things. You just want to list the one. Then you can have that dot, dot, dot. And it still shows that there's information in between, but you're still correctly citing it. You're not plagiarizing or copying it incorrectly. If you're adding words to a quote, sometimes you might have a quote that the actual work might not have all the information that you need. Maybe they specified what you're talking about in an earlier paragraph or earlier page, if they don't do it in the quote that you need. So you would use these brackets around that information. So if you want to add information, some individuals who retell urban legends make a point of learning every rumor or tale. The quote itself would say, some individuals make a point. And this just specifies to your reader who specifically they were talking about, but not necessarily in that specific sentence. So if you want to add information, add a name or something. I see this in news articles quite often. That's one of the many places I see it. You could put brackets around it. Summaries and paraphrases. Summary is a condensed version of an entire work. Paraphrase is often a single idea. So you might summarize a book or a chapter, paraphrase a few sentences or a paragraph. Paraphrasing, both of them include you putting something into your own words. without quoting it, but summary is a larger work, paraphrasing is a smaller work, or like a paragraph or a sentence. And also pay attention to the placement of punctuation. Some places are going to have commas, some of them are going to have periods. It just depends. And if you ever confused, you know, what I like to do, I'm not going to lie, this is what I do. I don't memorize things, like I said, like 3 or 4 times in this. So say I wanted to cite a book and I didn't know how to do it. This is me on Purdue Owl, that website I talked about earlier. Say I want to cite a book with one author, okay? My favorite book, I want to cite it. I'm going to show you what I do. This is literally what I do. I will copy it. So I will highlight it, copy. I will take it to, I'm just going to put it up here on this assignment sheet, for example. I will put this down the bottom. If I can find a place to put it, I will paste it. Okay, so this is me pasting it. This is makes life easier. This doesn't have to be the hardest thing in the world. And then I just plug in the information I need. So you have your format, and you can put Smith, comma John, period. And so you see where the punctuations go, period. And then now in italics, you see that's your book title. I don't know. It's a Thursday. This is a made-up title. There's probably doesn't exist. And then you have your publisher, Thursday Books, okay? And this doesn't exist. My zero's not working. And then your year. So even if you don't know what you're doing, I like to copy and paste it into my works cited page, and then I can just copy and I could just change what I need. And then I have that specific one. And if you're struggling to use how to find Purdue Owl, or struggling how to figure out how to use your textbook, again, the first question you want to ask is, what type of source are you citing? And so up here on the left, you can see lots of these. If you're citing a book, cite a book, okay? And so if you're trying to figure out how do I cite this chapter out of my book, you come down the bottom and you'll find more information. A work, an anthology, reference, or collection. That's the same thing I talked about earlier on that works cited PowerPoint, okay? And then again, you would copy and paste. If you have an addition up here, if you forget, where did she say to put the addition? You can see it's right after the text, it's right after the chapter. So the textbook is the 12th edition. You would say, okay, it's the 12th edition. And then I like to combine these, okay? So you would say authors, and that would be authors, title of the essay, book title, and then publisher, year, page range, okay? And that would be how you would cite the chapter title. So and some of these are going to show you like a specific format, like up here. Let's see, at the very beginning, trying to find it. It's going to show you like actually what that is, like last name, first name, title of book. And you just follow the format, okay? Works cited citations do have right answers. There are specific periods that go certain places. This should be italicized. This should be in quotation marks. But you don't have to memorize. I'm never going to quiz you on this. I do want you to know what you're doing and learn from it, but not necessarily a quiz. So I have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to, and does anybody have any questions? I'm going to come back here. A few people put the question in the chat. So Connor asked a few questions earlier. To cite chapter 4 for our work, do we have to include all 3 first names too? Yes, for everybody in Mla format, you should always be including the last name, the first name, and if there's a middle initial or a middle name. The difference is where you are putting them. So if it's a first person listed, it would be last name, comma, first name. If it's the other 2 authors, it would be first name, last name, just like you would say John Smith. So if it's Smith, comma, A for the first person, John Smith for the second and third person. Their names aren't actually John Smith, but that would be the order you would put it in. APA format is different. I think they have like the first initial. APA format typically tends to value the year. So in an APA format citation, you're going to see the year right next to the author's names. And in Mla format citation, they care about who wrote it. And then the year is usually down later on in the citation. And Connor also asked, so does our works cited go at the top or the bottom of our paper? I'm assuming you mean for the complex book entry, but for if you mean the essay or complex book entry, it's always going to go with the bottom. Okay, so put that at the bottom of your work, regardless of which one you're talking about. Brooks asks, can you have your email in case we have questions outside of class? So yes, so if you can't find my email, I talked to this on Tuesday. Anybody want to take a guess on where to find my email address? So yes, technically Blackboard, more specifically the syllabus. Okay, so the syllabus I showed everybody on, what is it, Tuesday? What are days? I don't know what day things are. So if you have a question, I'm sharing my screen again. So the syllabus, and if you look at the section here, the syllabus, you're going to see it pop up, load at some point. I don't know when it's going to load. I think I actually have it. Yeah, there you go. My email address is right up here. Okay, so it's always going to be right up there. Typically, if you try to search my name, it comes up in Google. But you can just, again, copy and paste my email address. It's right at the top of the syllabus there, so you've already had it. Anybody have any other questions? We have about 2 more minutes left. If you want to say or have a question verbally, you can unmute yourself and put it in the chat. As I drink my water, because I've been talking a lot. Okay, so for this complex book entry, Connor asked, how do we put margins and page numbers on Google Docs? For this specific assignment, don't worry about margins and page numbers. Those are for only if you're submitting a formal essay. Okay, so don't worry about that. Do worry about if you have the ability to do the hanging indent, do that. I'm not going to worry about that, especially for this first one. But I do care about everything else. So don't worry about margins and page numbers for the entries, but that would be for a formal essay. But this isn't a formal essay. This is like a journal. And these are journals that you're submitting on Blackboard, which means that your classmates won't see what you wrote. So it'll just be to me. Any other questions? These are great questions. So again, if anybody puts the last minute question, I can answer that. So just to recap, this is the complex book entry. So you can see this assignment sheet on Blackboard. I don't think I'm sharing my screen right now. So let me share my screen again. On Blackboard under the assignments page, you can download that, or you could look under the complex book entry tab on Blackboard and look at the specific assignment. So this first one on Tuesday, again, is under look at the schedule on the syllabus, and you will see exactly what's assigned for that day. This complex book entry is due at 7:59 a.m. directly before Tuesday's class. So this is the first assignment. It is 9:15, so unfortunately we are out of time. I do have a few minutes before this in my last class, so if you do want to stay for a few minutes and ask me any questions, I'll be able to talk to you. But otherwise, have a great day, and I'll see you next Tuesday.